3, no quartering of truths. 4. 4, 5, and 6 are going to be similar amendments that will reinforce what's already in the Constitution. Amendment 4. If you read the top couple lines, can we see it way back here? Maybe? Yeah. What? Yeah, it's pretty small. But the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. So no unreasonable searches and seizures without a warrant. Another term for a warrant is a writ. A legal document signed by whom? Who signs a warrant? A judge. Yeah, it has to be a judge. So no unreasonable searches and seizures. And there has to be probable cause. And they got to swear by that. And they must describe where they're going to search, who, and what they're looking for. So they can't say, I just know they're up to something. Let me go on a fishing expedition in their house. But like every other one of these amendments, before we get to the historical reason why they did it, can you see the loopholes? There's 2 really, really big ones. Define unreasonable. Yeah? Unreasonable. It's really hard to define. And what is it? What do you need a warrant for? And what is something that just happens? We saw them commit a crime, so we don't need a warrant. It's in the middle of arresting them for a crime. Like if a police officer pulls you over, highway patrol pulls over a car, and they stop you while you're pulling out your license registration. The highway patrolman has to look on your seat and sees 500 pounds of heroin. That's actually a lot of heroin. But the probable cause, was arresting you for speeding, and is it unreasonable to search through your car for that? No. But they wouldn't have pulled you over enough for the speeding ticket. We can argue what you see how complex this has become. That's my point here.
What I don't understand are the people that get arrested for only for resisting arrest.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's a
problem.
That's a good way to get rid of to arrest people, just to arrest. Yeah. And that's police powers have always done that. And sometimes that could be used to break up a mob, but also can be used to intimidate people. Yeah. And then define probable cause. I mean, that can be really difficult to define. Not only that, what if the probable cause is, let's say, top secret intelligence that can't divulge because it's national security? We know that person's involved in terrorist or potential terrorist acts, but we can't tell you how we got the information or even what it is, because then that would divulge our methods to gather intelligence and put that country at risk. But we need to search their homes. And what happens in that situation now? All they have to do is go to a judge. Usually it's called the FISA court and a couple other courts, and simply say, we promise we have good cause, but we can't tell you.
Promise.
Now, you could argue that actually makes sense. You can see real situations where they can't tell how they got it. That could also be really abused. What a great way to harass a political enemy. Get a warrant, search their home, bug them, harass them, which is a little bit of what the British did to the Sons of Liberty. And yes, the sneak and peek is one. We have evidence, but we don't want them to know we know, because then they might do their act now, or we can stop them, and thus the sneak and peek. And I told you about sneak and peek, right? So, once again, gray area. But the historical element that's so important here is whiteboard cleaner. Where's my pen?
Why is that so important?
Whiteboard cleaner? Yeah, I'm a neat person.
You say if you leave all these hard for all of them.
Yeah, it's art. It's the way the board makes me feel. The British would issue, writ is a term for a legal argument, and it's called a writ of assistance. And a writ of assistance was a blanket search warrant. And the British would use that to simply say, we know there's smugglers out there. So they would get a writ of assistance from a royal official and go search through everyone's ship. So that happened, and that's why we have this. Once again, there's an historical event, some issue, some controversy that this addresses. The Fifth Amendment. Okay, it says, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime. What's a capital offense? Murder, crimes that involve a significant amount of money, things like that, which also have the biggest penalties. What?
Felony?
Not all felonies. Some felonies are not capital offenses; they're not violent or don't involve a lot of violence, or doesn't involve deadly force. But there is a gray area. But it has to be more than a judge to decide whether or not to be tried. To get an indictment, it has to go to a grand jury. So a jury of their peers has to be called for capital offenses. That's a big issue, because a capital offense is to carry such a big crime. You know, it was used by the British, used in British history as a way to get rid of political enemies back in the English Civil War. You accuse someone of a capital crime, you get a friendly judge to have a trial, then you hold them forever until you have the trial. You harass, you bug, or you humiliate them, you embarrass them. It's a good way to intimidate enemies. So for capital offenses, you have to make sure that you go to a grand jury and prove you have enough evidence, that's a real case, to go to court. Because the grand jury might hear the evidence and say, no, you don't have enough evidence, you can't indict them, you can't go to trial. So I've had a few friends, I've never had to do it, but I've had a few friends who call for jury duty, they've been on grand juries. Most of them were on embezzlement cases, where usually taking money from their employers, but I had one friend was on one for a murder, and so that was really, in a very, I know that sounds kind of ghoulish, but they really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun being on that, because of just all the issues that went along with that. And I've never been on a grand jury. I've never been on a jury. One time, the only time I was ever called, I went there literally the morning of the trial, and they settled it. So I lived pretty close to the courthouse. I walked over, turned around, and walked home. And my wife has been on like 8. And she's like, how come I get called all the time? So that's a big issue. Now, you notice it says in land or naval forces, military is a different court. That's a different system. But if you go down here, there's one more thing we want to get in here. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be put twice in jeopardy of life or limb. That's what we call double jeopardy, and you can't be tried for the same crime twice. The whole thing about that is you can't be, let's say you're acquitted for a case, and they say, we still want to get you, so let's find a better jury and arrest you again. No, let's find a better one. In fact, you keep trying them forever. You just hold them and try it, hold them and try it. So if you're innocent, you're done. Now, it doesn't mean they can't find another thing to arrest you for, or if you committed, your offense might involve 5 different laws, and so that you're found innocent on one, we'll get you for 2. But still, you can't be tried over and over again. So that's Amendment 5. Same deal, that is what the British would do. That's what happened in British history. So let's go to Amendment 6. All prosecutions, the accused should enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by a jury. An impartial jury, meaning, so the prosecution technically can't pick 12 jurors that they know will find you guilty. The reason I added technically, because like in the South, for example, up until relatively recently, all juries were white men. And if you were white, especially if you committed a crime against a black person, you are innocent, according to that jury. And a black person, especially a black man, would be guilty every time. We'll get to a couple of cases, especially Emmett Till. There's a history there. But back to this. Think about how if he didn't have a speedy trial, let's say you're arrested for some crime. So you were jaywalking, and we pull you in and we're going to try you for jaywalking in 5 years. Keep you in a jail for 5 years and we'll have a trial. Huh? You don't do it just to hold somebody. That's how you intimidate people. That's how you get rid of political enemies. You find somebody you want to run out of town, or you want to run their friends out of town, or you want to scare them. You pull one in and just hold them. And the British did that. So we have to have a speedy trial. Even though if you know anything about, especially big city courts, they're way overbooked. And the same thing with a public trial. Think about a private trial that's not transparent. Secret. In the 18th century, the English did something, the British did something called the Star Chamber. These secret courts around King Charles. And they would pull them in, and basically, a lot of times, they wouldn't even see the people accusing them. Now it's vision some dystopian future where someone's like tried and just the lights on them, and these shadowy figures yelling questions at them and then condemning them. I know somebody like, that'd be awesome. That's actually like the worst nightmare.
Being the question.
Huh?
Being the question.
Yeah, being the question.
Say it again?
Being the person shouting.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you're going to be the totalitarian, psychopathic dictator, sure, that'd be kind of fun too. It's actually pretty scary. That's actually, I think, one of the visions of a nightmare world. But the British had that, and think how unfair a trial would be. Especially, remember that when they would try British subjects in Britain for crimes. Remember that was part of the coercive acts. That fits here. So the trial's going to be here, and it's going to be public. Does that happen all the time? Yeah. And one more thing. They must have assistance of counsel. Originally, all that meant was, hey, you can hire a counsel. You can hire a lawyer. We're not going to stop you. Well, lawyers tend to be very expensive, so that pretty much takes out a lot of people. In the 1960s, there would be a court case, which we will get to, called Gideon versus Wainwright, that said that everybody has to have, or you cannot deny somebody counsel. And if you don't have one, then they will appoint one for you. And that's where Montana, for example, has public defenders, overworked, incredibly hard job. States like Texas, they basically have the lawyers just have to volunteer a little bit of their time, and they're infamous for bad defense. In fact, they're infamous for lawyers falling asleep during the trial. A number of people have been executed in Texas, and their lawyers fell asleep during the trial a number of times. They tried to appeal it. We're talking about Texas here, so they're still executed. These three rulings, or these three amendments, 4, 5, and 6, all reaffirm the idea of habeas. Let me rewrite that. Habeas corpus. Habeas corpus, a legal term, and what it's reaffirming that what's in the Constitution, which means that if you are arrested, accused of a crime, you must be charged. You cannot be held saying, we'll come up with something. Give us a couple years, and we're going to come up with something. So you can't be held without a charge, and you cannot be held without a trial or a trail. You cannot be held without a trial, except in times of war or rebellion. So this would become an issue during the Civil War, where habeas corpus was actually, well, the president just ignored it for a while. And we're at war now. It's a big gray area. We are bombing people right now. An American soldier just died last week. So, gray area. All right, let's get to, yeah.
So technically right now, you could go and arrest someone.
Well, that's how they justified the Patriot Act. That's how they justified taking away your Fourth Amendment rights, is by saying we're at war, a war against terrorism. Actually, a war against terror, which is really hard to define a war against an emotion. So, I mean, it's kind of endless. So let's get to number 7. Same deal here, but about jury trials, but now when it says suits, we're talking about lawsuits. So civil court, a lawsuit. If there's a lawsuit, over a certain amount of money, big lawsuits, there'll be a jury trial. Because they were worried that, you know, someone could just sue and sue and sue and get in front of their friend the judge and win. So if it's big ones, there'll be a jury. And we're talking major money in 1789, $20. There's been a lot of inflation. I think the number is 11,500 today. But so if there's going to be a lawsuit, a civil trial, big ones require a jury. So judges can't rule. But small lawsuits, the judge would just rule. That's only in federal court, but now state. Eighth Amendment. Eighth Amendment, another one of these. What was happening were no excessive bails or fines. The British were arresting people, and for relatively minor offenses like assembling in public, for violating the Coercive Acts or the Riot Act, and then they charged a fine that no one could pay. I mean, imagine the jaywalking offense that I seem to do every day.
Ha.
Ha ha! And I was put in jail and say your bail, $1 billion. So you can, that's very excessive for jaywalking or walking on the grass or any other walking related crimes we can come up with. But, or fine or bail. But then, no cruel and unusual punishment. Well, first off, define excessive. And secondly, I would like you to define cruel and unusual. And as someone third period noted, I guess that means the punishment can be cruel as long as it's usual.
Because it's not cruel or unusual.
Yeah, it's cruel and unusual. Yeah. And so it could be usual to fall something, you know, people fall off buildings. That's not abnormal, so you throw them off a building. But it might be cruel and unusual to crush it with rocks. I don't know if it's cruel. Define this. And as time goes on, those ideas change. I mean, you could argue that putting someone in a prison cell could be cruel and unusual punishment. And if you don't believe me, go spend a month in one. No, I have not. But that was 10 years. Okay, so no, but the point is, you know, that's horrific. In fact, when they wrote this, that was written before our ideas of a punishment and you know, you'll set a set time in jail. That was a big prison reform of the 19th century. So this is before our ideas of how they punish people. Or for that matter, your solitary confinement. Is that cruel and unusual? Or methods of execution, or even execution itself? And think about how cruel and unusual it is when we have some crimes where it's not cruel and unusual to execute somebody. And then for some crimes, it is cruel and unusual to execute somebody. Isn't that kind of interesting? I mean, I'm talking about what the crime is. You know, we're not talking about your emotion and want revenge. We're talking about justice. So, once again, there's no absolute. It sounds good, but once again, no absolutes. So let's get to the last two. And the last two are all issues that dealt with a combination of what the British did, but also fear of the anti-federalists. The ninth is really easy to understand. I don't think I even need to explain it. Get it? Pretty easy, isn't it? It's horrible. Yeah, I'm looking at it. You gotta be kidding. You wrote that? What it's saying is this. You have rights. You have rights, even if they're not listed in the Constitution. You're not limited to the Constitution with your rights. So even if they're not listed, that doesn't mean you don't have those rights. You're not limited to the Constitution. Because there's a pretty narrow group of rights that say, no, it's more than that. No, it doesn't mean you can do anything you want now. Hey, it's not listed, so I can do it. But it just implies that we're not stopping here. You have rights. So when I mentioned the whole thing about personal weapons and arms for the Second Amendment, The Ninth Amendment was a big amendment part about that, because it said it's implied there too. So it's not, actually the Second Amendment I think is really hard to argue about personal weapons. Here, that's an argument. That's an argument, and that's in the Supreme Court ruling in 2008 that said you get some personal weapons. So that's the 9th. And then the last one, the 10th. The 10th Amendment, powers not delegated to the U.S. government go to the states. That's federalism. It says in the Constitution vaguely. It's very clear here, kind of. Powers that the national government doesn't have, the states have. Now, on the surface, that might seem cut and dry, but remember and put this down next to it, that necessary and proper clause. Remember that expanded the federal government, those implied powers? That's a big loophole, the necessary and proper clause. And there are people today that call themselves tenthers. And they're really anti-federal government and talk about we should have more power in the states. I've met a few in Jordan, Montana. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, Jordan's pretty cool. Who's been to Jordan? Don't brag. Don't lord it over everybody. I can't believe you laughed at it, so it's amazing. I think there's one place to eat. Oh no, you get food at the grocery store. So, why were you in Jordan?
I was fishing.
Oh, so up to Fort Peck?
Yeah.
Hell's Creek? Yeah.
Why were you in Jordan?
I've been to Jordan many times. Because I'm cool. They invite me in. More cool.
Do you even have to be-
Actually, my summer job all through college was delivering beer. We delivered to Jordan. Only Jordan. No, we delivered all over southeastern Montana. So, with that, and we had to do it by wagon. That's my age. So, one more thing to add, and add this for the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights only applies to the federal government. It only applied to the federal government. It was unclear if not only the Bill of Rights, but even the Constitution applied to the states. Only the federal government. And so you can get a lot of weird things that are going to be misinterpreted, misinterpreted government action before the Civil War, because the 14th Amendment that we ratified in 1868 said these now apply to the states. The 14th Amendment, so it wouldn't be until 1868 that states had to give these civil rights. If you think about it, that's pretty long. And that's why the 14th Amendment is actually by far the most important part of the Constitution. Because it basically says that state governments cannot deprive people of their constitutional rights. Not just the federal government. Now, what to do about freedmen, former slaves. So, that's the Bill of Rights. Who would like a quiz on that on Friday? You're going to get it. So who would like one? Okay, so the question is going to be, for those who did not raise their hand, will be just basically the letter. I'm just going to ask why. And you have to figure out how to answer that correctly for the Bill of Rights. Why? Not why, it's just going to be this. And you figure it out. New heading, the Federalist Era. 1789 to 1801. And this in many ways is the founding of the United States. No, the United States was not totally in the clear. There'll be a couple times in the history that have barely survived. And then that's just 2 years after this. I'm not even getting to the Civil War through today. But basically, the United States was formed. Fortunately, Britain was preoccupied. The French Revolution and fear of their king losing their head. So, the United States would be here. And the big thing about this would be, as president, Washington would set up a series of precedents and in many ways would set up our government. That's part of the reason why Washington's one of the great presidents. Not that he made the best decisions or that he was the smartest. He's a smart man, you know, but there's people smarter and people did more things. But his stability. and his statute could strengthen the government, hold it together, lay out the stability needed to form a new country. Yeah.
What did that say?
Precedents.
Precedents?
Precedents. You know what a precedent is? Anybody know what a precedent is?
Like, something that happens that becomes the like new normal.
Yeah. So,
Accepted.
so basically, you set up, we'll do this and everyone's going to follow that from now on. Precedents are really important in courts, legal decisions. Once a decision is made, then they keep looking back at the precedent, the previous decision. So, let me give you a couple examples. One that won't sound like a big deal, but it actually is. He's going to call himself Mr. President, and everybody else will too. Now you think, whatever, Mr. President, we were used to that, no big deal. Well, he's not your highness. He's not your excellency. They're not creating an aristocracy. In fact, the Constitution says no titles of nobility. So Washington wanted to be closer to the people with that term, Mr. President. Now, he still believed his position needed some kind of separation. He was kind of aloof anyways. He would never shake hands with anybody as president. He'd give a little bow, which is much more common. All of you should do that from now on. Move on. Who'd be the first president to shake hands? Way before that. Before. After. Well, before or after, there's been two Adams.
Jefferson.
Before John Quincy Adams. Jefferson. Jefferson was the first one. You said it, but I ignored you. I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. I feel pain. I'm over it, though. I'm moving on. 2 terms. Also, okay, he served 2 terms, partial of exhaustion, but every president would follow until FDR. In fact, FDR, Washington, and Lincoln would be considered the 3 greats, 3 great presidents, at 3 of the most important and dangerous times. Kind of lucky. We've had some near greats. We've had a lot of mediocre. Far too many bad. We're doing okay.
What?
It's personal. Senate confirmation. I just forgot what I was going to say. I'm there looking at it, hoping it would pop into my head. Senate confirmation. The Constitution says that the Senate will advise and consent appointees. And so what the president did is, this is supposed to be an A, the Senate will vote on whether or not they'll approve appointed judges or cabinet levels. It might not seem like a big deal, but it solved that hole in the Constitution, and that's what they still do today. An up-down vote on appointees. And then lastly, he created the cabinet. The Constitution says there'll be a cabinet, but doesn't say who will be in it. He loosely based it upon the English or the parliamentary cabinet. And the big thing about the cabinet, these are the ones that carry out executive duties. So the president delegates certain things like law enforcement to one cabinet, or the military, or money, finance, borrowing money, those kind of things. And so he created this, and we followed this basic rule. Now, first he only had 5 cabinet level posts, but eventually now what do we have, 18? And there are obviously ones going to be more important. And so let's look very quickly at his cabinet, because Washington tried to pull some of the smartest and brightest people together, but it's going to be heavily Virginian, because he's from Virginia. There's going to be real talk of what they call the Virginia dynasty. So the first one we'll mention is credit the Justice Department, but what we're talking about here is the Attorney General. And that would be Edmund Randolph. And Randolph, from Virginia, at first he was also going to be the president's lawyer, but now it's the Justice Department has to be separate from the president. Even though it takes the initiative from the president, but let's say that another executive branch meaning the president might violate the law. It's the Justice Department that looks into it. So there has to be some separation. So for example, the Attorney General is a leading law enforcement agent in the country. But then the presidency has their own lawyer, the Solicitor General. And then the individual person as president has their lawyers, personal lawyers. It's really kind of confusing. So we have a Solicitor General, and then President Trump has lawyers, personal lawyers, because he's under investigation by the Justice Department. That's happened before, but it can't be the Attorney General. Oh, there are two T's. Sorry. My abbreviation was wrong. I abbreviated the T's. Next, the War Department. Henry Knox, who commanded his artillery in the Revolutionary War. And the War Department's the Army. But during the Adams administration, they created a Navy Department. After World War II, they would combine those into, what is it today? Say it louder. The Defense Department. That's the Defense Department. Used to be the War and Navy Department. So, Defense. Oh, should I add, anybody know who the Attorney General is today? Jefferson Beauregard Sessions. And since he was involved with the Russians too, he had to recuse himself from that investigation. We are witnessing something I don't think has ever been seen before. So we have to go back to Nixon. This is really something. Watch. Pay attention. Hopefully there'll be more. Yeah.
Was Knox from Virginia too?
Actually, no, he was from Pennsylvania. Everyone else is from Virginia.
Okay.
So, now, the Defense Secretary, Mattis, General Mattis. Well, now he's just Mattis because you can't be in the military. Next, another thing I can't remember, state. And that's Thomas Jefferson. Now, originally the state was going to handle internal affairs and external affairs based on the Department of State in Britain. But now the state is only foreign affairs. So the Secretary of State, all the embassies, diplomats, all of those are under the State Department. Customs, or not customs. Customs is 50-50 actually. But the State Department. Who's Secretary of State today? Now, it's getting time to know these things, right? It's getting time. You don't want to be the adult who doesn't know these things. Maybe you do, I don't know. I'm dumber than you. Okay, so, Rex Tillerson, former head of Exxon. And you might hear these names, you might not know what they are. In fact, it just came out today that he called his boss a moron. He called President Trump a moron. He gave a press conference saying that, no, I'm not going to resign, but he would not retract what he said. Like I said, I have never seen anything like what's going on, and I've been around since about then. So I've seen a lot. It's not illegal.
Or is that like
Not for you can insult the president. You just can't say any personal threats.
You can't make free.
I saw that because what's his face's that's very explanatory. Daughter on Instagram called Trump like a stupid piece of crap and everything. I was like, that's it.
No, that's not illegal. Yeah.
Isn't it illegal though if you're like an active member in the military to insult them?
Yeah, if you're actually in the military, technically you can't insult your high ranking officer.
Okay, yeah. She was like in the Navy.
Yeah, she didn't know if you're in the Navy. Yeah, that could be probably not. But that's potentially court-martial. Yeah. So lastly, the Treasury, and the Treasury Secretary, he would pick his trusted advisor and war hero, Alexander Hamilton. And Hamilton, Washington really admired Hamilton. You know, Hamilton started out from about as low roots as possible, an orphan, self-educated, worked his way up to become Washington's aide. Hamilton was absolutely brilliant in a lot of ways, and I would argue terrifying. Jefferson thought so. Yeah, that put 2 L's. Does that help?
It's an amoeba.
There. And here's the thing. Pretty soon, the disagreement in the you can read through that, Hamilton and Jefferson will show the disagreements within the cabinet that will also lead to the first disagreements within the country and the first real factions. Hamilton and Jefferson. Because the issue is this. It's nice. In fact, you hear people say this all the time. Wouldn't it be great if they could come together and solve the problems? But people have different ideas of what's best for the country. And in fact, I want to know what the different ideas are. I don't want somebody to say, you know, there's only one way to go. Because, boy, what a great way to stifle any other idea. Sorry, we got one way. Shut up, only one way. No, I want to know different ideas. I want choices. Well, there were choices. And which direction is the country going to go? So here we have two men, in their own ways, patriots, but they have totally different views about the future of our country. Jefferson said he envisioned a country of yeomen. What are they? Farmers, agrarian, tillers of the soil, not tainted by debt or the search for money, which is kind of weird coming from a slaveholder. But that was his vision. What did Hamilton see the world? Industrial, commercial, finance, urban. That's totally different. That means different policy by government. That means different goals. And there we have the factions divide. Who's a better person? Yeah. Jefferson thought Hamilton was evil. Hamilton thought Jefferson was a duplicitous, dishonest slaveholder, which by definition is evil. So, they're not going to come together. Thus the two parties. And what we're coming to is later on we would dub Hamilton's plan, which means his economic plan, because government has huge influence and control over the government, over the economy, I meant to say. I think government has huge control and influence over the government. Sometimes I don't know anymore, but Hamiltonian economics. Now there's 3 L's. Anybody have a problem with that? Or one really big L.
Yes.
Now, they didn't call it Hamiltonian economics, but what we're talking about here is how he wants to use the government to influence the economy, which the government has immense influence in every single economy in the world. And where there's no government, you don't have an economy, like much of Somalia. So, who did he want government to help? Not all people. Some people, they don't need the money, or he doesn't want to encourage what they're doing. Not all elite. Who?
Creditors.
It would be creditors mostly, but a lot would be creditors, but not all would necessarily be creditors. But it's that merchant class. Not elite, because he doesn't want to help plantation owners. Government, he thinks, should not be helping farms because he sees that as backwards. That's going nowhere. We're going to create wealth by manufacturing goods. And we're not going to buy them from Britain anymore. We're going to create industry here. The Industrial Revolution is just beginning in Britain. He has the vaguest idea what it really means, but a merchant class. And what will they do? They will take the money and invest it in manufacturing or industry or finance. Take that money. So government policy should do everything they can to put more money and power into the hands of the merchant class. Now, people use the terms conservative and liberal today, and I think people mostly misuse them, and actually I don't even know what they mean a lot of the time. I think part of the reason people don't know is because they're misused all the time. So I've heard people call President Trump both conservative and liberal economically. Clearly, there's a lot of people who don't know what the terms mean. Hamiltonian economics is the basis of which one? Conservative or liberal economics? See, I just said it to you. All of you have heard the term conservative and liberal. Let's get to it. Which one?
Conservative.
This is the root of conservative economics. Conservative economics' goal is to put as much money in the hands of the very top. How do we know what is President Trump? Ultra conservative. And his tax plan wants to put, what is it, 79% of the tax cuts will go to the top 1%. In fact, some people would get a tax increase. In fact, the bill he proposed, I would get a tax increase. I'm not in the 1%. I know you're shocked. I'm a teacher. But that's very conservative. Now, we'll talk more about this. It'll get the terms trickle down, supply side, but that's conservative. Liberal economics, soon to be called Keynesian economics, that isn't really developed because we're still pre-capitalism. But let me tell you one thing really quick. Last thing here. What he wanted was this. 3 big bills. And the first one was called the Assumption Bill. Your textbook calls it the Debt Assuming Bill. Sorry, I don't know why. That's the first time I've ever seen it called the Debt Assuming Bill in my life. And I helped craft the thing. But what it would be is the United States would assume what debt? Every state bond, colonial bond, war debt, Continental Congress, Confederation Congress, they would assume all government at all levels, all their debt. They pay back all the bonds. All. At 100% of the value. So even bonds from Massachusetts Colony, or the Confederation Congress, or the Continental Congress, pay them all back. But if you pay back all your debts, what does that give you? Good credit. To do what? Far more. So we'll finish this. All government debt and bonds. Well, I'll film the class and you can watch it if you want. Oh no, you have the last one. Yeah. So we're going to finish it tomorrow. The quiz will be on Friday. I'm going to sign that reading for Mondays. That's it. So the thing about the assumption is a really big deal. So. What's that? For somebody else who don't. Oh. Probably, yeah.
I know. That might have been you have to oh, wait a second. This is in English.
See, that's how people harass me.
I don't know what that is in English.
That's a letter from Martin Luther King.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Now I know what it is. Perfect. I'm going to be on Friday.
Jordan! You're going to bring it back something, right?
Yeah, always.
We're going to finish up the unit.
Okay, so. Yeah.
And no, I've not got a response yet from PBS.
Did you like sincerely email them?
I basically said, you know, I've been given for a long time, and now I find out you want more.
That's my dad. I bet that whenever stuff breaks, he's gonna write it on the back. Oh my god.
Yeah, I can see that. But so that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. But my guess is they're not alone. I've got a lot of people. This kind of surprises people.
That was intense. Oh my gosh, freeze now.
Yeah, where were you? You were sick. You were just getting ready to walk. And that's the thing that I was going to say good things about the Twins. And it was, now, I'll never say bad things about the Yankees because they're evil. But yeah, the evil empire. Right? So we took that quiz on Vietnamization, and then I was going to show a movie, but then PBS cheated me. Oh, so let me tell you how.
Actually, can you check that again to see if it was just like a 1 to 1?
So I ended up talking a little bit about the federal federal case on where I included the video. And I'll finish up a few things, talk about Vietnamization. We're gonna walk. I had it all planned to show you little excerpts of the Vietnam War, the moratorium. I had this all planned, and now I can't do it. And you just laughed, Joe. You said, "Hey, you're back on the good list. Open the stocks." Where are you going? You could run here. Don't you get those little glasses and you can watch me live on YouTube? I don't know. I don't know what the hip kids are doing today.
I'm also gonna be gone
Oh, no way.
tomorrow. And Friday.
I'm going to do the home front kind of thing. There'll be no additional. The test will probably be Monday or Tuesday. I don't want to test on Monday, so let's do it Friday.
Okay, so we're taking
Oh, I'm filming all this.
right now?
No, the test will probably be on